on the opposite sides of the street instead of going by the house.
Boo Radley is used very deftly, in my opinion, by this wonderful author to realign the community in a more classical way. I mean, initially what we have, Boo, the Radley house that neither blacks nor whites want to walk by, that this great mystery of this demonized view of the family at first is one that's shared by the community. And that's what a community is, isn't it? A group of people who feel the same way about something.
Boo Radley is two things to these children. One thing is he's scary. But the funny thing about children is children love to be scared. This is kind of part of the adventure of life. And I got into that in a big way. The first time they go to the Boo Radley house, the music's a bit over the top almost. It's very gothic, it's very big. But that's part of a commentary on the way the kids feel about it. Another thing that kids really enjoy, and I played on that a lot, is the mystery of it all. What was going on in that house? Who was Boo Radley? And what went on? And very often I did things like this, which suggests a sort of childish mystery. It doesn't say anything, but it asks a question.
Edgar Allan Poe said that we're attracted to terror because we long to know some reality above this surface of appearances that we're doomed to labor in. We long to know some kind of transcendent verity, some glimpse of truth. He called it supernal beauty.
Unlike Boo Radley, Mrs. DuBose was a visible monster. She was a permanent fixture there on her porch, showering the neighborhood with her bigotry, bitterness, and notorious white camellias. Her taunts would get under anybody's skin, especially Jim's, who could not tolerate her attacks on what he held for sacred, meaning Atticus. So it didn't seem fair that after he beheaded all of her precious camellias, that Atticus not only made him read to her, but made him do it long after what was called for. What was Atticus up to?
Grand seeing you, Mr. Bowes.
Somehow he knew that Mrs. DuBose needed the distraction to overcome her morphine habit so she could die clean and in control of her life. This was true courage, and Atticus wanted Jim to see it and know it.
Ruth White got into makeup every day, and it would take her 4 hours to look like this old lady. And I just hated to lose it.
And it was beautifully played, beautifully directed by Bob. The kids are wonderful. And in the cutting of the film, it stopped the film. Again, the difference between books and film.
My experience growing up in a town like this, it's very true. We were half amused and half celebrated the eccentric. We were kind of in awe of them, that they had the nerve to be eccentric.
People who live here said Monroeville had more than their share of what we call the characters.
My aunt was giving this birthday party for her youngest son, and they were out on the front of the house because there was a cement walk out there, and they were skating up and down that little short cement walk. And my aunt went back in to get something to renew some of the refreshments, and she heard the sugar cane popping. So she ran back out and asked me if I could shoot her husband's gun. And I said, yes. She said, well, come here. And I thought, well, what in the world does she want me to shoot the gun for? And she says, there's a bunch of those kids down there popping off that sugar cane. I want you, when I holler, get out of the sugar cane patch, point the gun in the air right up over the sugar cane patch and shoot it. So she hollered, get out of that sugar cane patch, and I popped the gun about that time. And they all started running. Well, there was a barbed wire fence right behind the patch. And they just tore their clothes up getting over that fence. And, oh, my aunt just laughed. She thought that was the funniest thing to see those boys running.
Oral history is at least as old as Homer. and nowhere is it more alive than in the South. The spoken story imparts the breath of ancestry and the mental stomach for digesting our knowledge of good and evil, which may help explain the gift of rhetoric exercised in abundance by our preachers and politicians.
There's a great oral tradition in the South, and we have institutions that really feed the oral tradition, and we see them in the book, the church and the courthouse. The value of the oral tradition is its democracy. It doesn't give to an intellectual elite the exclusive right to shape communal memory and the collective memory. It makes into a commonwealth the story of our shared lives. It's something that we share in common, and it's like a collection plate into which we can all put something, our stories, our myths, and the ease with which we are able to, in some way, cross boundaries.
It has been said that a Southerner would rather talk than read or write. Perhaps because if it isn't social, why bother? If it can't be discussed on the front porch, then it better be high adventure and infernal romance, balm for our restless and very individual souls.
Most homes at that time had a porch, and after the lady of the house had done the housework in the morning and prepared the noon meal, in the afternoon, she cleaned up in the early part in, and she went visiting. She maybe went next door and sat on the porch with that neighbor for an hour or two, and not necessarily next door. Might have walked half a mile. My mama lived here, and her sister lived on the other side of town. And one would go to the other's house and visit a while, and then when she started home, that one would walk with her to town. And they'd stop there and visit a while, and then when they started to separate and this one would go back home, that one would go back with her a piece of the way. So it took an hour or two while they were visiting for them to get from one house to the other.
My goodness, you know, half the time we spent talking. And now, there's television and all those things that disrupt, and Lord knows what's going to happen in the future when all these channels start intruding into our lives.
There's a lot of difference in the first few years that I taught in the attitude of the students to what they were in the last years I taught. When I first started, they were interested in learning, and they could see that it was something worthwhile. But after everything else came in, television and all those other things that detracted their attention, they were just quite different.
Our society is totally different from what it was in 1930s when this book happened. Families don't interact together in the same way. Television, video games drag kids away from the families.
How'd you like school, Scott?
All right.
You're never going to get that, let's all sit around at the dinner table every night and let's talk about how you did in school today. Kids aren't interested in doing that anymore. And we've given them permission not to be interested in that anymore. Our culture has given them that permission. I mean, how many smart-mouthed kids you see on TV? All of them.
I'm ready!
Oh, Jim. It's half an hour before school starts.
Miss Ida Gilliard, she was the business math teacher and did some of the bookkeeping and work in the principal's office. And she's still living at Purdue Hill, and looks very much like she did when she taught me when I was in the 9th or 10th grade.
I believed in discipline. We laugh all the another teacher that's still living. She and I laugh all the time about it. If we had to do it now, we'd be in the pen because they wouldn't put up with us. We had discipline.
You demanded the respect of your students, right?
Absolutely. Neil can tell you that.